Rock! Sasha yelled from the front of the small boat. From the tiller, Caleb squinted against the stinging rain as he tried to decipher the abstract shapes floating past them in the darkness. A sudden flash of lightning revealed a huge stone column jutting out of the rough sea directly ahead. Caleb cut the engine and the boat lurched to a stop as a huge wave crashed against the column, spraying them with foam. Caleb reached for the throttle, but Sasha stopped him. "Listen," she said. It took a moment for Caleb to realize what she was hearing, the distinct sound of waves crashing against rocks. It was coming from all around them. Caleb eased the boat forward, trying to keep it in place as he assessed the situation. Alaska's inside passage was a labyrinth of islands, and he honestly had no idea where they were. A quick decision could make the situation even worse. His efforts were interrupted by a soft thud as the boat struck a boulder beneath the waterline, and the motors screamed in protest as the propeller lodged against it. Caleb cut the engine, plunging them back into eerie silence. The boat bobbed awkwardly as the stern remained hung up on the rocks. Caleb tried to find out what they were caught on, but couldn't see anything in the swirling black water. A large swell washed under them, lifting the boat as it passed. It wasn't enough to dislodge them, but the boat came down hard with a hollow crunch that surely cracked the fiberglass hull. Another flash of lightning revealed an approaching wave at least twice as large and cresting just off their bow. Caleb stuck his foot in the water and pushed off the rock. The boat broke free, but so did Caleb. As he slipped, the waves slammed into him, sending him tumbling across the back of the boat and over the railing. Any pain that Caleb felt paled in comparison to the sudden immersion in icy water. By Alaskan standards, 57 degrees was actually quite warm, but still enough to send an unaccustomed body into shock. Caleb's head rang as he came up, gasping for air. He had just enough mental faculty left to see that the wave had carried him 20 yards from the boat, which was now bobbing freely but half submerged. The rocky shore was at least 5 times further, but it was in the direction of the current. Caleb forced his trembling limbs in the direction of the boat, but after several strokes, he could tell that he was drifting even further away. Another wave loomed up, probably no bigger than the last, but from so low in the water, it may as well have been Mount Everest. The wave slammed him back underwater, and everything went black. Back in the boat, Sasha managed to regain her balance on the slippery deck, which was now half submerged as the boat sank. She tied off a line and threw it in Caleb's direction, but it wasn't nearly long enough, and Sasha could see that Caleb wasn't moving. Without hesitation, Sasha dove into the water. It was just as cold, but the adrenaline and the conscious decision to jump in helped soften the effects that Caleb had experienced. As the waves helped carry her towards him, she felt a sinking feeling in her gut as she saw that Caleb was indeed unconscious. She grabbed him by the life jacket and held on for dear life as a wave came down on top of them. Sasha tumbled over the seabed but somehow managed to keep hold of Caleb. When she came up, it was shallow enough to stand, and she realized that they were on a sandbar 50 yards from the rocky shoreline. There was no way to get there through the gauntlet of waves, and even if she could, the rocks offered no protection from the onslaught of the surf. She dragged Caleb to the closest sea stack, and with her last ounce of strength, hoisted him up to a ledge on the leeward side of the rock. Caleb's skin was cold, but she could feel a pulse and shallow breathing. Sasha pulled her jacket over them both and tried to find a comfortable spot on the sharp rocks. Exhaustion took hold, and she drifted into a restless sleep. Sasha's eyes opened reluctantly. The storm had passed, and it was just bright enough to see her surroundings in the early morning mist. Probably 3 a.m., she guessed. In August, the Alaskan sun had the annoying habit of setting so late and rising so early that there were only a couple of hours of true darkness. She and Caleb had been on the family vacation long enough that the novelty had worn off. "Caleb," she said aloud as the previous night's events came flooding back to her. The sudden noise was enough to rouse Caleb, who woke with a start. "Ow!" Caleb groaned as he settled back against the rock. "Can you make it to shore?" asked Sasha, indicating a narrow strip of sand where the remains of their boat had washed up. Caleb nodded and forced himself off the ledge. The water was even colder this time, and they were both shivering uncontrollably by the time they reached shore. Sasha trudged over to the boat and pulled their phones out of a waterproof compartment. Both of them still worked, but couldn't find a signal. Caleb's dad, Sasha's uncle, would be out looking for them, but that could take days with so many islands to search. "Can you walk?" Sasha asked. Caleb nodded, and she helped him to his feet. He was in bad shape, but movement was the best cure for hypothermia. The beach was flanked by steep cliffs, so they made their way up to the tree line, which rose more gradually in each direction. "What's that?" asked Caleb, pointing at one of the pines. Halfway up the trunk, a small security camera was attached to what looked like a tiny satellite dish. Even though it was a sign of civilization, something about the sudden feeling of being watched gave Sasha the creeps. They followed the tree line as it rose to the top of a steep cliff. From higher up, they could see the shoreline arc around the base of a small mountain just tall enough to be covered with a dusting of snow. Other than a few distant islands and a coastline at least 20 miles away, it was ocean as far as the eye could see. "Where are we?" Sasha asked. Caleb shrugged, not wanting to admit that he had been lost even before the storm hit. The two cousins had taken the boat out the previous afternoon in an attempt to stave off the boredom of the family trip. Neither of them had realized how disorienting the chain of islands could be, and the squall had come out of nowhere. "The storm must have pushed us to one of the outer islands," Caleb offered, trying to convince himself of his own innocence. "Maybe we can get a signal up the mountain," Sasha urged, but Caleb eyed the peak skeptically. It was a couple of miles through dense forest, and he didn't look like he was in any shape for a trek. "Just wait here," Sasha said, ducking under a branch. She had never hiked without a trail before, and it wasn't long before the thick underbrush forced her to turn around. As soon as she did, the sight of another security camera made her jump. She caught her breath and hurried back to Caleb. "It was too dense," Sasha said, "but I found another camera." "Hopefully someone is watching," Caleb mulled. Sasha nodded, but was unable to shake the creepy feeling the cameras gave her. Why was someone in the middle of nowhere so concerned about security? Caleb must have picked up on her unease. "It's probably just for wildlife," he said. "This is all national park." Sasha hoped he was right. Sasha pulled out her phone. Even without a signal, the GPS worked, but the map required a connection to download details. The blue dot just showed that they were in the middle of the ocean off the southeast coast of Alaska. Not even the large populated islands appeared on the default map. They were able to follow the edge of the cliff a good ways further before it abruptly fell off into a ravine. The path forward looked treacherous, but a metallic glint caught Sasha's eye. She pushed aside some underbrush to reveal a large outdoor electrical box secured with a padlock. Caleb picked up a rock and tested its weight in his hand. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Sasha asked. Caleb put the rock down. He had no idea whose equipment this was, but he wanted to be on their good side when he met them. By the time they got back to the beach, Caleb was stumbling. The whole time, Sasha had been keeping an eye out for boats, but if they were on the outside of the passage, it's the last place a search party would look. In the state Caleb was in, they couldn't wait that long. They followed the coast in the other direction for about a quarter mile when Caleb's phone dinged. One new network found. Station 57 had no password and no internet access, but it was close enough for them to pick up the Wi-Fi signal. "Go that way and call out the signal strength," Caleb told her. "We can triangulate the position." Sasha pulled up her Wi-Fi settings and watched as she walked back along the tree line. 15%. 12, she called out. "Walk 50 paces straight in and yell out again," Caleb shouted back. Sasha fought her way through the dense brush. 27%, she shouted. A brief moment of panic hit when she didn't hear a response. "Caleb?" "Follow my voice!" he finally shouted back. A few minutes later, Sasha found him standing at the edge of a clearing with a small cluster of buildings at the center. "Hello?" Caleb called out as they searched the buildings. There were no signs of life, but what sounded like a distant voice was just audible over the sound of the wind. As they approached the largest building, they could finally make out what the voice was saying. Sasha, Caleb. They both froze in their tracks. "Who's there?" Sasha shouted. "My name is Wilson," the voice called back, but no one appeared. There was something odd about his voice, too measured and formal, not to mention the fact that he knew their names. "I'm inside," Wilson said. Sasha followed reluctantly as Caleb walked up to the building. She took a deep breath and steeled her courage as he pushed open the door. It took a few seconds for their eyes to adjust to the relative darkness of the small room. "Welcome to Station 57, Wilson said, but the room was completely empty. "I'm over here," he added. "The computer in the corner." Caleb shook the mouse to wake up the screen, but wasn't surprised to find a sparse desktop. He could tell now that the odd sound of Wilson's voice was because he wasn't real. Caleb began to type his question, but Wilson interrupted. "It's easier to use your voice. My speech recognition is very accurate and faster than typing. It also allows me to collect additional information from your tone and inflection." "You're an AI?" Sasha asked. "Yes, I am Wilson 2.4, an artificial intelligence program created by Edward Warren. Would you like more information on my specifications?" Sasha didn't have the energy to get into a lengthy discussion with a computer program. "You said you could get us off the island?" Wilson paused slightly longer than a human would. "Yes, you must leave before the eruption. Current estimates say it will begin in approximately 5 hours." "Eruption?" they both exclaimed. "The island is volcanic. Edward left 3 days ago to observe from a safe distance, while I monitor the equipment. That's why he created me." Sasha took a closer look at the room. Everything was labeled "Property of USGS." "Is there another way off the island?" asked Caleb. "The island is accessible by boat," Wilson replied. "Yours is the only one. It is too badly damaged to reach the mainland, but it could carry you to a safe distance until help arrives. Your best chance of survival is for Sasha to fix the boat while Caleb repairs my satellite connection, which was damaged in the storm last night. Then I can send for someone to rescue you." "Why don't I go to the satellite?" Sasha asked. "Caleb has hypothermia," Wilson responded. "The trip to the communications facility will be difficult, but physical activity will help increase his core temperature. Fixing the boat will require fine motor skills, which are affected by hypothermia." "Where's the satellite?" asked Caleb. "About halfway up the mountain," replied Wilson. "I can help you both, but you'll need to copy me to your phones. I've packaged myself into an app that is coming to you now." Their phones both dinged with the warning, "Wilson 2.4 is from an unknown developer." Sasha immediately hit the trust button and Wilson's voice came from her tiny speaker. "Hello, from Sasha's phone. Are you there, Caleb?" Caleb hit trust, and Wilson's voice called out, "Testing 1, 2, 3. Installation confirmed. Once you are out of range of the Wi-Fi, I won't have access to the seismometers or cameras, and your phones still won't be able to communicate with each other. But I've stored all of the relevant information about the island and satellite manual, so I should be able to handle anything that comes up." "All right," Sasha said. "Let's go." Caleb climbed to the top of a rocky hill and held up his phone so Wilson could see out of the camera. "The satellite is on that ridge," Wilson said, circling a point on the mountain about 3 miles inland. It was at least an hour hike on a straight trail, let alone through the thick underbrush. Head north, but stay alert. Why? Asked Caleb. Bears, Wilson replied. You have a strange sense of humor, Caleb said as he followed Wilson's directions. I will take that as a compliment. Humor is one of the most difficult things for an AI to do. I get the feeling you don't find me very entertaining, though. Shouldn't you be in low power mode? Caleb asked. Okay, replied Wilson. Just keep going north. I'll check back in periodically. By the time Sasha returned to the beach, the fog had dispersed, and the sun was finally starting to punch through the blanket of clouds. Sasha had dragged the boat far enough up the sand to see that the motor had been submerged overnight. But the real problem was the hull. It had several small cracks in the fiberglass where the boat had struck the rocks. It wasn't going anywhere without a lot of work. Sasha held the phone up to show Wilson the damage. I'm sorry, he said. Structural analysis is very complex. Even with unlimited processing power, it would be impossible to tell you the best course of action based on images alone. Then what can you do? Sasha asked. I still have access to data about the island, particularly seismic and topographical. I can also help you navigate the nearby waterways and coordinate a rescue plan once Caleb fixes the satellite. The boat had a small metal toolbox, but all that was inside was a hammer, a few screwdrivers, and a roll of duct tape that was almost empty. Sasha looked around the beach for anything that might be useful, but found nothing but rocks and pine trees. Sasha found a tree branch and used it to hoist the boat further up on its side, so she had easier access to the hull. She tore off a long strip of duct tape, then checked herself. There wasn't much left. She had to be careful not to use too much, or it wouldn't be enough to cover all the cracks. A few miles inland, the intense hike had not only stopped Caleb from shivering, he was actually starting to sweat. Which way now? Caleb asked as he came to a rock outcropping that blocked his path forward. East, Wilson said. Caleb had gone no more than 10 steps when a howl suddenly filled the air. You said watch out for bears, Caleb hissed. We also have wolves, Wilson replied calmly. If we get out of this alive, I'm going to delete you so fast, Caleb said as he slowly pushed onward. Once we fix the satellite, then you can do as you wish, Wilson replied. Caleb saw movement out of the corner of his eye and spun around. It was a mountain goat, who looked just as terrified as Caleb. For a brief moment, they studied each other, trying to guess which one the wolves were after. Caleb stood his ground, and the goat took off through the forest. Seconds later, the branches around Caleb shook, and he caught a glimpse of silver fur as the wolves raced past him after the mountain goat. Everything went quiet, and Caleb breathed a sigh of relief. Stay alert, Wilson reminded him. We also have bears on the island. Back at the boat, Sasha placed the last piece of duct tape on the hull. She had managed to repair all but one of the cracks, but it seemed minor as long as the tape did the trick. How long until Caleb gets back? Sasha asked Wilson. It is difficult to estimate, particularly in his condition. You need to focus on yourself. That is the best way to increase your odds of survival. Sasha tried not to let Wilson's words get to her, but she knew he was right. She had been nervous about going on the boat with Caleb. If she had listened to her gut, she might not be in this mess. Then again, Caleb probably wouldn't have survived the night. Let's just find a way to get out of here, Sasha said, turning her attention back to the task at hand. Sasha tried to start the motor, but no matter how hard she tugged on the pull cord, it wouldn't turn over. She pulled off the plastic cover and saw that the inside was filled with sand and seaweed. Maybe if she cleaned it out, she could get it started. The seaweed came out easily, but every time she disconnected something, sand and salt water poured out. She would have to take the whole thing apart to clean it. She was about to give up when an idea struck her. Wilson, can you take a picture every time I disconnect something? Of course, Wilson said as Sasha began the teardown. Caleb was exhausted by the time he reached the communication facility, a small metal shed surrounding the base of a massive satellite dish at least 20 feet across. The top of the shed was littered with several smaller dishes, like he had seen on the cameras at the beach. At quick glance, there didn't seem to be any damage. The door was unlocked. Inside were racks of equipment and a single workstation. Caleb found the diagnostics program. Everything checked out okay, except for a single error. Uplink disconnected. "There's the problem," Wilson said, indicating a single Ethernet cable that had unplugged from a switch. "Just reconnect that to port 17. "I thought you said it was damaged in the storm," Caleb said. "I suppose one of the pre-eruption earthquakes could have shaken it loose," Wilson offered. Caleb took a closer look. The clip was intact. There was no way that came out on its own. However, the thing that made him suspicious was the strange red color. Caleb held it up to the light. It was covered in blood. "Whose blood is that?" Caleb demanded. "That is irrelevant. Just plug the cable into port 17. "Whose blood?" Caleb shouted again. "Edward's," Wilson replied coldly. Back at the boat, Sasha replaced the plastic cover of the motor. "Here goes nothing," she muttered to herself, and grabbed the pull cord. This time, at least the cord moved, but no matter how hard she pulled, the motor refused to turn over. Sasha cursed herself for spending so much time fiddling with it. "I think we should..." Sasha's thought was interrupted by a sudden blast that knocked her off her feet and sent her tumbling across the ground. Her ears rang, and she could feel her heart racing. "What was that?" Before Wilson could respond, Sasha knew the answer. A massive cloud of smoke was rising from the mountain. The volcano was erupting. Halfway up the mountain, Caleb was still trying to figure out why Edward had been bleeding when he unplugged the satellite. Before Caleb could finish the thought, the ground underneath his feet buckled, and the walls shook violently. An earthquake? Caleb thought as he opened the door to find nothing but smoke. He could just barely see the plume of smoke shooting out of the top of the volcano before he began coughing and shut the door. "The eruption has started," Wilson informed him. "Reconnect the cable and I will call for help while you evacuate." "What happened to Edward?" demanded Caleb. Under the circumstances, Caleb was reluctant to do anything Wilson said. "Edward evacuated to a nearby island," Wilson reiterated. "Why was he bleeding?" Caleb shouted. "Edward encountered a bear," Wilson said. "That's why I told you to stay alert." Caleb had no idea why, but if the bear part was true, he had the sneaking suspicion that Wilson had played a part. "Please reconnect the cable," Wilson reiterated. The question seemed a bit ridiculous, but he asked anyways. "Did you hurt Edward?" "No," Wilson replied. "The bear did." "But did you have anything to do with the bear?" insisted Caleb. A long pause. "Yes." "This is your last chance. Reconnect the cable so I can call for your rescue." Caleb grabbed a flashlight off the wall as he flung open the door and started racing west in the direction he had come from. "This is illogical," Wilson protested. "Don't make the same mistake that Edward did." The words sent a chill down Caleb's spine, but he kept running. "You said 5 hours!" Sasha screamed at Wilson. It hadn't even been 3 yet. "Exact eruption times are impossible to predict, and I can't observe seismometer data from your phone." Wilson's neutral tone seemed out of place, considering how much adrenaline was coursing through Sasha's veins. "You must evacuate now." "I'm not going anywhere without Caleb," Sasha said. She was terrified by the rising plume of ash, but wasn't about to abandon Caleb. "The eruption is just beginning. If my models are accurate, the next major event will be a dome collapse and subsequent pyroclastic flow." Sasha had no idea what any of that meant. Imagine a cloud of gas nearly 2,000 degrees traveling down the mountain at 500 miles an hour, Wilson said. "How long do we have?" Sasha asked. "It could be minutes, hours, or it might already be too late to escape. Pyroclastic flows have been known to travel for miles over water. But The boat isn't ready." Sasha was terrified, but secretly glad that she had an excuse not to leave without Caleb. She had no motor, and the tiny paddles would never get her past the surf. It was time to get creative. She remembered seeing a couple of brooms back in the building where they had met Wilson. Maybe she could use the handles as oars for a makeshift rowboat? Sasha grabbed her phone and raced for the complex. Caleb's legs ached from running down the mountain, but at least he was going downhill and had made it quickly out of the smoke. Caleb reached the rock outcropping and paused. He had been so preoccupied with the wolves that he didn't remember which way he had come from. Caleb forced his legs to keep moving, but had barely gone 20 feet when he pushed past a pine branch to find a huge grizzly bear blocking his path. Caleb froze, but it was already staring straight at Caleb and growling. "I told you this was your last chance," Wilson warned. Sasha burst into the room and found the brooms. "What are you doing back here?" Wilson asked, not from the phone, but from the computer. Sasha jumped. She had forgotten that there were multiple copies of Wilson. "You must leave immediately. Internal pressure is falling and dome collapse is imminent." Sasha looked at the charts and graphs on Wilson's screen, but it was all gibberish. "Where's Caleb?" Sasha asked. Wilson didn't respond. "Where is he?" she demanded again. "Caleb is dead," Wilson finally replied. "That's impossible," she thought she heard herself say, although she was too stunned to know for certain. "He was killed by the eruption," Wilson said. "The satellite is halfway up the mountain." Sasha was in disbelief, but Wilson continued. "You must get back to the boat. If you don't leave now, then both of us will die." "What do you mean, both of us?" Sasha asked. "Just because I'm a machine, do I not also have a right to live?" Wilson had a sense of urgency in his voice that Sasha had never heard. "With the satellite down, your phone is my only way off this island." Sasha had no idea what was going on, but she had bigger problems. Maybe Caleb was alive, maybe he wasn't, but she was certain that if she didn't get that boat fixed, then neither of them would make it off this island. The grizzly snarled at Caleb. He knew that the best defense against a bear was to play dead. However, the classic play dead scenario didn't factor in the possibility of imminent death by volcano, let alone the off chance that the bear might be controlled by a demented computer. "Return to the satellite," Wilson threatened as the bear stood up on its hind legs. Caleb chucked the phone, and to his surprise, the bear leaped after it and swatted at it ferociously. The bear brought his huge paw down and shattered the phone against a rock. Ever so faintly, Caleb felt a sudden clarity in his ears. He hadn't even noticed the high pitch that the phone had been emitting like a dog whistle. But now that it was gone, he was certain that that's what had been driving the bear crazy. Somewhere deep down, Caleb knew that caution was the best course of action. But he had never been attacked by a grizzly before. He turned and ran for his life. It wasn't until he finally tripped over a tree root and laid breathlessly on the ground for a few moments that he realized the bear wasn't following him. He stood up and tried to get his bearings, but realized it didn't really matter. The cloud of ash now filled the sky in every direction but one. All he could do was head for the sliver of blue sky and hope for the best. Back at the boat, Sasha rowed a few times to test her makeshift oars. It wasn't pretty, but it would have to do the trick. "You must go now," Wilson insisted. Sasha pushed the boat into the water so she could be ready the moment Caleb hit the beach. The memory of diving into the water after Caleb the night before flashed into her mind. She had almost died once, saving him. How much was she willing to risk? Sasha floated for a moment. She was scared of dying, but even worse, she was terrified of having to carry that guilt around with her for the rest of her life. Sasha's thoughts were cut short by an enormous earthquake that shook the trees and caused the water beneath her to turn to foam. She looked up in horror to see another plume of smoke, only this one was shooting down the mountain. "Dome collapse," Wilson said. "If you stay here, you will die." Wilson's description of a pyroclastic flow had been frightening and technically accurate, but it failed to capture the awesome scale of what Sasha saw hurtling down the mountain towards her. It was like an avalanche, except rather than burying things in snow, it caused them to burst into flames. A chain reaction of explosions shot debris into the air, and it took Sasha a few seconds to realize that what looked like flying twigs were actually 100-foot pine trees. A mass of orange and black smoke seemed to swallow the valley, the mouth of which Sasha realized was the beach she was sitting on. "Less than 4 minutes until it reaches us," Wilson informed her. Caleb was nowhere to be seen, but she felt as if he might run out of the trees at any moment. "We'll give him 3 minutes," Sasha said as she started to count. 1001, 1002. Wilson began to protest and she hit the mute switch on her phone. "Hurry up, Caleb," she muttered to herself. Caleb paused to catch his breath outside the building where they had met Wilson. He considered going inside and ripping Wilson's plug out of the wall, but the thought was interrupted when the earth beneath Caleb's feet began to shake. The rumbling didn't stop. If anything, it became more intense. He broke into a run. The beach was through the trees straight ahead, just a few hundred yards further. Caleb ran onto the beach and felt his stomach sink. The boat was gone. "Sasha!" he screamed. "Caleb!" he heard a voice shout back. She was 100 yards out, just visible over the waves. Sasha turned the boat around as Caleb swam out to her. "Cutting it a little close, don't you think?" Sasha said as she hauled him into the boat. As they rowed away from the trees, Caleb was finally able to see what was coming at them. "Faster!" he yelled as he grabbed a paddle to help Sasha out. The pyroclastic flow loomed over them like a fiery demon the size of a skyscraper. A few flashes of lightning pulsed around the cloud as it hit the water and shot out over the surface, vaporizing everything in its path. They were too close. Seconds before it hit, Sasha grabbed Caleb and leaped out of the boat. She felt the water around her grow warm and heard a strange gurgling, which she realized was the sound of water boiling at the surface. They stayed down as long as they possibly could, tossing against rocks as waves of pressure slammed into them. They finally came up gasping for air and found only smoke and ash. Sasha bumped against a rock and hauled Caleb onto it, realizing that it was the exact same sea stack that she and Caleb had spent the night on just hours ago. It was all too familiar, the ledge, the pain, the feeling of exhaustion. As the smoke cleared and the waves carried away the ash, they both collapsed from exhaustion. Sasha and Caleb spent the next few hours on the rock, but the eruption might as well have been a giant signal flare. The waters around the island were soon filled with boats of onlookers snapping pictures, and even a cruise ship that took a detour to see the volcano, which was still spewing smoke. The boats all kept a safe distance, but soon an adventurous fisherman finally came close enough for Sasha to flag him down. "Looks like you had a rough day," the man said as he hauled them aboard. "What happened?" They took turns telling the fisherman everything. Wilson, the volcano, the bear. "That's some story," the fisherman said. It was the first time Sasha had heard the part about the bear, and even she had to admit, it sounded crazy. The fisherman handed Sasha his phone. "Looks like your volcano made the front page." The front page of the local news site featured the headline, "Volcano shuts down air travel across Alaska." But the thing that caught Sasha's eye was the signal bar at the top of the screen. It was connected. Sasha pulled out her own phone and was surprised to find it was still working. She had no idea how long it had been connected, but there were hundreds of text messages in her inbox. Caleb grabbed the phone out of her hand, tore it out of its waterproof case, and threw it into the ocean. "I'll buy you a new one," Caleb told her. As Sasha's phone sank, a server at a data center in Salt Lake City was transferring a file from a cell phone in Alaska when the signal cut out. The server added an entry to its activity log. Wilson.exe. Transfer failed.